Welcome to Dedicated. Today we're with Megan Abbott. She is a best-selling and award-winning crime fiction novelist. She's won the Edgar, the Barry, and the Anthony Awards. She's also written for television. She was showrunner for the show Dare Me, which is based on one of her earlier novels. Her latest novel is called El Dorado Drive, and I devoured the advance copy that I have here. It's totally terrific, and you will also love it. Megan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. And your choice for the drink today, I'm excited about, is the gimlet.
Yes, it's a serious one.
So if you're out to the restaurants in New York, it's a gimlet?
It's a gimlet. You know, if I'm going the cocktail route, it's a dangerous cocktail. It's strong. It's not a martini, but it's getting in that realm of, one will do me, but
yeah.
It is my favorite. It's sort of got a crime fiction history. It was famously Philip Marlowe in the Raymond Chandler novels.
That's right,
it was his drink. He talks about a gimlet and how it should be prepared.
Right, he has a specific line on how to put it together. It's like half gin, half...
It's very heavy sugar. Like it's half Rose's lime juice. And I prefer lime juice, not
like
Rose's.
Real,
Rose's lime juice has mostly sugar, but yeah.
Should I put a little simple syrup in? Or?
I think so,
okay,
yeah.
Just a tiny bit.
Just in honor of Raymond Chandler. So early on, I made that my drink in honor of him, and it turned out to be my favorite anyway.
So is he one of the early inspirations for you?
Yeah, he was a big one. I'd never read anything like that. So it was so atmospheric and all that mid-century crime fiction, mid-last century.
Like Dashiell, Hammett?
Completely.
We'll get it. I have in my notes to ask you about your debut book, which was actually nonfiction about this kind of stuff.
Right.
So we'll get into that because you were talking about sort of that hard-boiled, I don't know, maybe sort of overly masculine language around it, or not overly, but just it's a way.
Hyper-masculine.
Yeah. But yeah, like the why I oughta smack you one or something like that.
They're not very politically correct either. There's a lot, women aren't treated very well. There's a lot of darkness in them, but I think they're great. And they're, reflections of their time, talking 1930s and 40s and when men were men.
Smoking Chesterfields.
That's right. And always getting beat up.
Right.
Knocked out, the whole experience. Oh, they look beautiful.
The wheel.
The wheel.
So if you're on the listening audience, there's a very good-looking lime wheel here on the rim of the glass.
Amazing. Beautiful.
Cheers. Great to see you.
Great to be here. Oh, man, that's fabulous.
That is yummy. It's more gin than I think I realize at the moment. By the end of that glass, I'm going to be fully into the interview.
Yes, be committed.
So we were actually, before we got started, you and I, before we sort of hooked in the mics here, you're talking about you're from the Midwest. You're born in Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
Yes, that's right.
Do they say hoagie or sub out there, or soda or pop, or how's the language go?
It's definitely pop. It took me, when I moved to New York, forever to get soda, and, replace it with soda, and all the sort of flat Midwestern accents, and pronounce roof instead of roof. There's a lot milk instead of milk, so there is these
milk.
weird...
Oh my God, I think milk. My wife makes fun of me because I'm from Philly, as you and I were also discussing, and there is a strong Philly accent. I have a bit of it.
Yeah.
There was that show with Kate Winslet a while ago where she really nailed the Philly accent, and it's like home instead of home, and I still kind of have a home.
My mom still says water instead of water, and she's lived for 50 years in the Midwest. So some of that stuff is hard to break.
These are little details we can get right in the novel.
Yeah.
So and Grosse Pointe of course becomes more relevant as we get into the book later. But that is the setting of your book. I only know it from the John Cusack movie. That's how it's
most people,
in my brain.
Yeah, if we didn't have that, we would not have much cinematic representation.
It is great, but we're in sort of Detroit suburbs.
Yes.
So now this also, again, in the book, there's a lot of people sort of formerly or sort of hanging on to the automotive industry. Was your family in the automotive world?
No, but everyone I knew was. And my dad was a professor, and they were East Coast transplants. So we were always a little odd ones out. But everyone I knew, mostly their dad worked at one of the Ford, GM, etc. Mm-hmm. it was in the 80s when I was a kid, and it was just bottoming out. It was cratering and losing, all the
as early as the 80s.
Yeah, because they were all going to Japan then, and they were losing their dominance, and then the city was sort of emptying out, and now it's really on this rebound, not through the auto industry, but through other industries. But in my era, it was really a dark time for Detroit. It was sort of there were no street lamps, you couldn't get your mail, there was no grocery store in the entire city. But in the suburbs, you would be weirdly buffered from all of that. So it was such a weird contrast. As my dad taught in Detroit, whenever we'd go downtown or go to a museum, it was like going into a different planet, because it was sort of falling. It was beautiful Art Deco buildings that were kind of in decay.
Yes,
It was really interesting.
I've noticed that. And one of the places I went on book tour not long ago is Milwaukee. And it has this rich history that it was sort of like home of many robber baron types 100 years, because all the early brewing stuff was there. And then the city changes quite a bit and the brewing thing kind of goes away. But you have these incredible examples of architecture from that time, these totally ornate, gorgeous buildings that could be in Paris or something, but you're in Milwaukee.
Really Rust Belt stuff. I've seen that in Cleveland before and in Pittsburgh, where there are all these industries that aren't industries in America anymore, and so you have this sort of lost era where you see this boom time that is now gone, and if the city can kind of reinvent itself, like Pittsburgh has, through the arts or something. But it is sort of an unusual part of the country, and I think somewhat exotic to people that don't know the Midwest, that there is, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that these were the cities you went to.
Yes, they were growing. That's where the Fonz was, and Laverne and Shirley. Right. It was all happening in Milwaukee.
That's right. And best beer, know.
Yeah. So how about siblings?
I have one older brother a year who's a prosecutor back in Michigan. So he's very useful to me, as you can imagine, as a crime writer, because I'm always asking him questions about what would really happen if, or, often it's like he'll talk about the curse of CSI, because it makes people think that all cases have DNA and that all prosecutors and police officers have this elaborate equipment where they can, and the reality of it, which is that no one has the budget for this kind of high tech.
I've read about that. And so as a jurist, someone who's on there determining guilt or innocence, you're expected to have this sort of blow the lid off moment, and it's not always
it mostly
that way.
Has to be circumstantial, and so he really brings it down to earth, and it makes it more real. Those details you want as a novelist is sort of grounded in the real.
Yeah. So he's still in Michigan, and you spent a lot of time in Michigan. I think Michigan undergrad.
Yes.
And so big time football fan, I assume.
No. I mean the school was. I mean I supported the team, of course.
Right,
and it was a very big era for Michigan. It was they were achieving football and basketball, but it was
Brad Meltzer, I think, is also a Michigan guy, right?
He is. We have discussed that. Yeah, it's a real. It was he also was there during the golden days when we were winning everything and had our rivalries, with Notre Dame and Ohio State. But I
always think of The Big Chill, that movie, right? They were Michigan, or were they the rivals? I can't remember.
They were Michigan, because Kevin Kline even wears a Michigan t-shirt.
That's what it is. Yes. Yeah, so they're watching the Michigan, I guess, Ohio State game or something?
Yeah. So that scene was iconic in my household. But I usually would sell my tickets, because you'd get a lot of money for them then, and go buy beer or something.
Did students automatically get a ticket?
You get tickets, free tickets. So you could sell them for a lot if you were
that's a good
clever.
Racket.
Yes.
If you don't, if that's not your number one thing, you can make a little money on the side.
I mean, I went to
it's fair that way.
Yeah, and I would participate in the celebration.
Yeah. So then you go from Michigan undergrad to NYU.
Yes.
And I think a PhD there.
Eventually, I didn't intend it. I really just wanted to move to New York. I'd always wanted to move to New York. Sort of fantasies based on movies and stuff that I'd seen as a kid, and so I thought, well, I'll apply to graduate school at NYU, but then I just stayed. I just didn't ever left until suddenly I had a PhD. So I just love the city so much. And
what did you love about it?
I mean, it has that energy that people talk about, but it's one of those things where either you're built for it or not, and it matches how you feel inside or not. And to me, it always matched how I felt inside.
You got to love the pace, and you got to not care about the sacrifices that come along with it. Like it's just hard to sort of have any extra money ever. Everything is harder. I remember my first two apartments were both burglarized within a week of moving in, and this is the 90s, so it was slightly sketchier city, but there would be like a hole in the floor of the apartment. The landlord would just put a piece of cardboard over it. You just couldn't count on it. If you don't find that to be part of the charm of living here, then it's
You're probably not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I loved it. I loved getting to see movies and plays, and I love the whole culture.
All at your fingertips. It's really, you walk out your door and you enter the world, and whatever you want to do is there, really at any hour of the day. I remember first moving here, and it's like 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm young and had energy. Let's do something. And it's like there were so many things we could have done at that moment.
It makes it so obnoxious when you're in another place and you can't imagine why there's no restaurants open at 12:30 at night.
Yeah.
And in New York, that would be unthinkable. You can go to any restaurant at 12:30 at night.
And you decide to teach pretty early on after the PhD. You start teaching because you studied literature, I think, English, American Lit.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought I would be a professor, but really only taught. I taught as a graduate student at NYU, and then for a year at SUNY Oswego, upstate, up in the snow belt up there. But I never felt it was the right fit for me.
SUNY, like SUNY Albany?
Oswego.
Oswego, okay.
So it's right. It's sort of very near Syracuse, and it was really remote, and the students were great. But that was when I started working on my first novel, and that really started to be the key. I'd never really written seriously before. And
were you working on fiction before? So your first book out was a nonfiction book,
right?
In 2002.
That's right.
But had you been working on novels a bit before that?
Only, in that way you first do, you're writing fragments of things. You don't really know how to build a novel. So, I was working on something that actually became my 5th novel, weirdly, which never happened. So I tell people never throw away anything. But I didn't really know how to build a story. So, but then my dissertation that became that first book was all about hardboiled fiction, film noir. And so as a side thing, I started writing I wanted to write a book in that tradition. And then that became, and that, something about the crime story, that's the engine for the story. I had been trying to write straight fiction, and I couldn't figure out how to build the story, but crime fiction creates your plot. The engine is there. Someone's killed, all these things start to happen. So you sort of have, the suspense is built in. So it sort of gave me a way in.
So I haven't read your nonfiction debut. It's called The Street Was Mine.
Please don't.
Oh, wait, well, I'll just ask about it then. You can. I won't read it if you tell me all about it.
No.
But so what's the thesis? You're sort of examining that Dashiell Hammett era of crime fiction?
Yeah, that's right. Dashiell Hammett.
Dashiell Hammett is the author of Maltese Falcon and a number of other terrific. Red Harvest might have been his debut.
That's his debut. Strangely, now I'm going to be adapting that for TV, which is talk about a full circle. But it was really about that tough guy figure that I think now a lot, most of us know from movies, from Humphrey Bogart.
We can't dissociate it from Humphrey Bogart, of course.
Because he's the one who played Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe from the Raymond Chandler novels and so many movies like that. And it's sort of examining that figure and what he sort of fulfilled for readers at that time as someone who sort of the individual, could single-handedly be your tarnished knight and solve a mystery. But he was sort of, the books are messier than that. The movies are pretty much the tough guy is the hero, but the books, he's sort of a mess and a disaster, and he's sort of a loner, a drifter, and can't really lock down in with anything, and is very frightened of change. So it was really about that. But it became this back door for me to just find all these books I love that felt like they were all so like drive driven, I guess is the way I would put it, because they're all about greed and revenge and lust and longing and these really primal emotions, and somehow they just felt very alive to me. But there were no women in these books except for like the femme fatale, and she's never really a character. She's just this glimmering object. So that was how I ended up writing my first novel, is to try to write one of those with a woman in the center. Are
all your books female protagonists, or do you have?
I have a few that aren't, but for the most part they are. Awesome. My second novel actually has a male protagonist, and some of them have many protagonists, but that tends to be, I guess, because it's different now, but it was such a male dominated genre so long. So it was a way of setting myself apart, to put a woman in them and have them behave just as badly as the men,
or heroically too. And we'll get into El Dorado Drive in a bit, but you have these three sisters who are sort of driving the propulsiveness of the book, and you get the not only each unique character, but the interplay between the sisters and the other women in the neighborhood. It's really terrific and well done. But getting back to the early days, your fiction debut is 2005 with Die a Little. And that was with S&S. I just wanted to ask you quickly. I know you're not with S&S now. Did you follow an editor, or you just switched publishers? What happened?
My editor had left, so then I ended up going to. How when you're in publishing a long time, all the editors do this sort of do-si-do where they all switch houses.
Yes.
So I moved to Little Brown for my next set of books, and then
by staying with the same editor who had moved as well.
No, that my editor had left, and we ended up going with Little Brown for, I guess, sort of, my editor had not found a place yet at that time. So we ended up at Little Brown with Reagan Arthur. It was this amazing editor, and was so lucky to be there. And then I had a series of books there, and now now she was moved to Knopf, and then I moved to Putnam. It is really kind of
there is a musical chairs thing.
And then I moved to Putnam with the publisher and editor who now is at Little Brown, so I'm a new editor. So it is a little bit of like editor swapping.
It's interesting to work with different people too.
It is.
And you pick up a little bit each time.
You do.
I am with my third and hopefully my last editor. Because I really love my current editor, Peter Borland, who's at S&S.
Oh, yes,
Do you know Peter?
Yes.
He's awesome. He's really, really great. And we found you find a rhythm,
you do.
And sort of a working back and forth. And I have no complaints because my experiences with everyone along the way has been good, but it's really good with Peter, and so hopefully I'm.
And it's a rare thing because it is a weirdly intimate experience because you're showing them your first draft, your messy draft, there's sort of their help. You really count on them, to save you from embarrassment.
And they care about it. They're the only person who in the world who cares about it even close to how much, and maybe who knows, as much as you do. So it's nice to have that.
Yeah.
So how did it go with the first novel? I mean, was it sort of out of the gates? I didn't.
It was slow to find an agent, and the book changed a lot. And then, but then I did, and then I sold it. But my first few books, all at Simon and Schuster, they did a wonderful job with them. They had these great. Film noir-ish, hard-boiled covers in the spirit of the era, but they were all books that were set in the mid-century, and but they were very niche because of the way, because of the nature of the story and the way they looked. I think it was a small readership, small but passionate.
So you're still teaching and working and whatnot these days?
Yes, definitely. Yes, I was still working. I worked until I started to get Hollywood money. And that's really the only thing that I was so worried that, because you feel like it could fall apart any minute. So I slowly my day job hours got smaller and smaller the more books I had, but it really wasn't until. Did
you find that your time that you devoted to writing became less efficient the more you had of it, or?
I mean, in a way. Restrictions, I think, can be good. I do. Sometimes you get nostalgic for those times when you had like 5 hours a week to, like you had the weekend, or like I would do one.
Scrambling.
I gotta make it work. But you kind of, at a certain point, if you have the opportunity, you want to. It's irresistible to get to know, like, what would I do if I had more time? I mean, the question of how useful it is ongoing. Sometimes I think there's only so much you can really write in a week, and more time is just more time to fret.
That's true. Yeah, like the Hemingway thing. You got to let the well fill back up with water. There's only so many buckets you can get out of there in a week.
That's right.
I noticed you also did a couple novels based on true crimes.
Yes.
One was the, just so the audience knows, if you want to like get back into the Megan Abbott archive, The Song Is You from 2007 and Bury Me Deep in 2009 were both based on real crimes.
That's right. Really kind of gruesome. In the case of Song Is You, it was a real kind of a Black Dahlia kind of situation.
In my notes, look at that. James Elroy, written there, author of Black Dahlia.
Yes, it was really inspired by him, and it was another starlet who went missing right around the same time. Some people have speculated it was the same killer. Her body was never found, but it was a way, again, to write myself into James Elroy style novel, and then Bury Me Deep is this famous case called the Trunk Murderess case, which was about this woman in Phoenix who was accused of murdering her roommates in a fight and then trying to deposit their bodies by stuffing them into a trunk. And that's how they found the trunk when she was trying to transport it. And it's really...
I mean, it is incredible, some of the real life stuff out there.
You can't make it up.
You cannot. There are a couple of Netflix documentaries on these crazy crimes that are entertaining, but yours can then take that and then elevate it a bit. By the way, have you met James Elroy ever?
Yes. He blurbed one of my books. I had the great James Elroy experience once.
Just so the audience knows, he Black Dahlia, but also L.A. Confidential and a number of other terrific books.
Yes, and really kind of was the one I think to sort of the undercover, like the underbelly of America, but especially Hollywood and LA. He was so much my hero, and I met him at the LA Times Book Fair, and then he took me out to dinner at the Pacific Dining Car in LA, which was like a scene out of one of his books. So many scenes in his books take place there. So it was really like a fangirl dream come true, and we had many dinners since, and it was amazing to get to talk to him and see how his brain work, because he's a real character.
Have you figured out? Okay, I'm dying to know if you know how his brain works. Because he came on the show a couple years ago, and he didn't know that I do a lot of prep for these, and so I knew all about him, and I've read his books, and I love his books, and no one comes on the show whose work I don't admire and appreciate. And but he does a million interviews, and half the time they've never read the book.
Of course.
And he's. I think he would say maybe sort of abrupt in character, maybe.
Yes.
And so he has very little patience for that sort of thing. So it was only about halfway through the interview where he realized, like, oh, wait, this guy's read the book, and we're actually having a nice conversation here. But in the beginning, I encourage you to go back and listen to the James Elroy episode, because he was bananas. At first, I'm like, this guy's a crazy man. And he was sort of, and he started talking about his penis in the interview and things like that. He does. I guess that's a thing.
Subject.
You know that? Yeah. Okay. So you were aware.
And his dog.
But he has the most fascinating real life experience. I mean, and tragic in many ways. Like his mother was murdered, and so the Black Dahlia is all about his own investigation into trying to find the killer of his mother. I think his dad had an affair with some huge Hollywood star, Rita Hayworth.
Yeah.
So I had all these notes to ask him about that stuff.
Yeah.
And before we get started, he goes, I'm not comfortable talking about this, and this. I'm like, there's half the interview right there. So we just, we had plenty to talk about anyway. Yeah. But all these things I was dying to ask him about. He's like, that's all off limits. I'm like, oh, all right.
Oh, I think.
Anyway, he was a lovely man. And by the end of the interview, we had sort of connected, and it was nice. But
well, I'm sure he was so glad. And I think, has written so many books, but those were the books that really, I think, continue to haunt people and made a lot of us writers. And, but I think they're very personal to him. And I do think he thinks, and I think he's right, that his latter books, I think he thinks of them as like great American novel fiction. Like they're not crime stories. And I think sometimes he resists being sort of pigeonholed as a crime writer. So.
Well, I think those genres are breaking down more and more all the time. I mean, the classic example that's come up a number of times on this show is John le Carré. It's like, that's not a great crime novel. It's a great novel, period. It happens to be about espionage.
That's right. That's right. Richard Price, I think, would be another example.
Yeah. And you, too. These are great. This is a great book. It gets into, like, if you're a sister who wants to sort of have some insights into examples of sisterly relationships. You totally capture it here in El Dorado Drive, too.
Yeah, I think it's the genre is in some ways just the vehicle to explore all this other stuff. I mean...
And the salespeople need something to say, and like, here's how we're going to talk about this book and tell readers. Yeah. There needs to be that element of readers because there's literally a million books published every year. Like, it is more than that, actually, now. So people need some sort of toehold into understanding what they're looking at.
Right, and where do you put it in the bookstore? It's just the way that bookstores are organized too. But I always feel like that, it's easy to get hung up on that stuff. But in the end, we only can write the books we can write, and you just have to trust that the readers will find them somehow.
Well, I'm glad when you met Elroy, who you considered to be a hero. It delivered. That is a rare thing.
It was intense.
To meet your hero and it worked out.
You were a mistake. It was great, and it is always fraught to meet people you idolize. And Richard Price was another one, and many of them, David Simon. It's very fraught.
Well, now you're on the other end of that. All these people are like, I got to meet Megan Abbott. I hope I impress her, and I hope she's nice to me and as great as I think she is, which you are, as it turns out.
Well, you don't know my dark side.
Well, let's talk a moment about the Hollywood money. So Dare Me gets picked up for a TV series.
Yeah.
Not only that, you're showrunner.
Yeah.
So how was that?
It was really...
Meaning like you're running, so the audience knows, you're running the writer's room. There's a whole team of writers on these things, but you're running the writer's room.
Yes, right. And these days increasingly, you're on set the whole time. So so it was the collaborative aspect of it was completely exhilarating because you have all these other great writers you're working with. And then when you're in production, you have the production designer, the cinematographer, the costume designer, the camera operator, and they all want to transform this thing into something great. And so they all come with ideas. I mean, I always think about the prop master was one of my favorite department heads on set because it's a show about cheerleaders and murder. But he would come with these, like, I think that this character would have this on their backpack, and he would come with like 40 water bottles. Like, I think this one would, they all bring all their creative talents in their sphere to it. So it just gets richer and richer as it goes. And it was exhilarating. It was exhausting. And, it was in development forever.
What were your hours like?
I mean, when you're shooting, it's really like 60 to 70 hours a week because you're shooting.
Where did you shoot this?
In Toronto, which was supposed to be.
It seems to move around depending on where the latest tax scam is. Like it could be Budapest or Atlanta or wherever.
And they'll always try to get you to shoot in Atlanta, but Atlanta does not look like the Midwest. And the show is in the Midwest. Like the minute you see those magnolia trees, you're like, this is not the Midwest. But yeah, it was great, and it was a great crash course and all that stuff because it's a weird thing where you're learning as you're doing and you're figuring it all out as you go.
That's so cool. Do you miss it?
I mean, I've had a lot but I was continued to work in TV since then, but nothing that's gone into production yet.
Would you ever write specifically for TV? As opposed to it. So this was an adaptation of your novel, Dare Me, then you ran the TV series. Would you ever bypass the novel piece of that and just write a show?
I have done that. Yeah, okay. I have done that. I've adapted other people's books, and then some original material. Like I worked on a project at Apple for a few years about a real life satanic panic story. Right now I'm working with Scott Frank on this adaptation of Dashiell Hammett novel for Netflix. So I did kind of get the bug.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that about your career. I apologize, because normally I've captured that in my
well, you
homework.
couldn't have, because that stuff is never. It's never public. It's not a secret, but it's really that
you haven't done
green
the press
light.
releases
You have
on
to
it,
green light,
Okay.
yeah. Once you get that green light, so it's really stuff that it's such a speculation business, Hollywood. So there's all these. Everyone's writing everything, and no one knows what's going to make it through the gate. So
well, let's talk about process for a bit. Now that we have two processes going on, because you're like a Dennis Lehane type here, where you've done great novels, but then adapted novels and written specifically for film and TV. Dennis blurbed this, I think, right?
He
was
did.
It this or something else?
He did. Yes, he
Was this
blurbed
one?
that
Yeah.
one. It was a huge thrill for me because he was another one who I idealized so much.
He's terrific. A great writer and a great guy. I have a funny story I'll tell you. I think I've already told it on the show, but he once saved me at a book festival from falling into a swimming pool.
Oh my gosh!
I owe him huge on that. But let's talk about process for a bit. So why don't we start with the differences between writing the novel and writing for film and TV?
Yeah, boy, there are so many. The novels are so interior, and they're so intimate. Relationship with the reader. You're really trying to, trying to make the reader feel and see all these things, and trying to, in case of suspense, you're trying to sort of keep them on this sort of line where you want to give them only so much, and then keep them guessing, and maybe some readers will get ahead but others won't, and there's something really. I always feel very close to the reader in my head when I write it. They're just very interior that way, and TV and film are the opposite. They're completely visual and exterior. So when I start a novel, I have like a loose structure for it. I usually know 3 acts. I don't outline more than that. But in TV, you outline everything. So by the time you sit down and write, I have my outlines are like
total framework for where it's going to go for the whole season or for a show.
No, eventually for the first season if it goes forward, but you definitely have the whole scene by scene planned out. It actually makes it much easier to write it. It's hard to write the outline, but because you're trying to figure out how to, you have to be so much more economical. Every scene has to do at least 3 things or it shouldn't be there. So
what are the 3 things?
Well,
is that even in the formula or no?
It is. I guess there's sort of. It has to move the plot along. It has to, these are my 3. They're not everybody's, but everyone will say you need at least 3 things. It has to move the plot along. It has to me, build suspense and raise questions, and it has to illuminate character. So, and I also think there's a great David Mamet thing where he says in every scene, every character wants something, and you need to know what they want when you write the scene, and that needs to come through in the scene. So no character is wasted. If a character is in there and you don't know what they want, then they don't belong in the scene.
Oh my God. So right now, where my mind went was, is this going to annoy me or enhance the experience when I watch the next thing? Like I'm going to watch every scene now looking for the 3 things. Like, did they do it? Did they accomplish that? Like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to watch TV the same.
I know. Probably David Mamet doesn't watch TV.
He's probably too disgusted with most of what's going on.
I'm sure we break all that. But the thing it really, I guess the sort of bottom line is that you have to, everything has to matter and do something. And the way, and then the sort of challenge for me is always try to do it in an interesting way that you don't expect, because there's really traditional TV writing, which is great. To be a master of that is incredible. But the form has shifted as we've moved into streaming and, and limited series and all these sort of things we didn't have, and where to distinguish yourself, you do kind of want to take risks and
I'm going to do one thing in this scene, and that's it.
That's right. It's
no
only
more than one
thing. Or like the classic example of something that then went too far is like the bottle episode. Everyone wanted to do the bottle episode, which is episode that takes you out of the driving narrative and like follows one character and something that is completely separated from the rest of the series. And it was
why
very
do they call
exciting.
it the bottle episode?
I guess because it's sort of, you could throw it into this, it's like completely
isolated.
That's right.
Oh, interesting.
But then that really went too far. Now when everyone sees, oh no, this is a bottle episode, we're not going to get any story advancement. But stuff like The Sopranos innovated. Sometimes in The Sopranos, there's storylines that never go anywhere, and we love it. So all rules are meant to be broken.
That's interesting. I can't remember if it was Dennis Lehane was on, Paul Mazin was on, who does the Last of Us. But somebody was saying they had worked with David E. Kelley on something, and the person saying this was a hugely esteemed writer of both books and film, and they're like, that guy is next level. Like, I learned so much just getting a chance to work with him on a show for a little bit. I think it might have been Dennis who was saying that about him. But
yeah, that makes sense because he came up in the 80s originally. He's seen television change so much. So I think there's secrets that people like that can tell you that are kind of, it's sort of like the big book that helped me when I made the move was Tony Gilroy's script for Michael Clayton. And he's very famous for Andor and other things, but he really talks about the actual way the script should look on the page and how you shouldn't waste a line. Like the first thing you think when you start writing a script is it's about dialogue, but actually it's not. I love great dialogue, but it's really about the person reading it, which is the person who's going to write the check. So you need them to feel the things that you're feeling. You don't have the novel's trick where you can go into everyone's head. And so he would talk about how he would describe a character, and this is just stage direction, as sitting down at her desk for a sad salad. And that tells you everything you need to know about that character. And
that's a good, useful. So were there specific things you did to figure out how to go from writing a novel to that? Because so many people have done it well, like you and Dennis Lehane, and others have failed, even if they're, I think William Faulkner, one of our greatest novelists, was not that great a writer for film and TV. So were there certain steps you took or things you studied when you made the switch?
I
Not
did.
that you've made the switch, but when you decided to do some of that.
That's right. No, it's daunting at first. Dare Me was originally going to be a feature film. So first I wrote it as a feature script, and I had never written anything like that in my life. I didn't really connect to any books about how to write a script. Like advice books have never really helped me. So I just went and read the scripts of movies or shows I liked, and I tried to figure out, like, work backwards, I will remember, like, some of the stuff I still think about.
It has all the stage direction in it. I've seen those for sale on tables in New York City sometimes. You walk, it'll have like an old Woody Allen
That's right. That's how you used to get them. Now you can kind of get them all online. It's everything now. But that's right. You would think, I would love this scene. I love this scene in Goodfellas. I love this scene, where they go into the Copacabana and the camera follows them.
Yeah, the one camera shot that goes the whole way.
And you think, well, is that on the page or is that just a directorial thing? And then you read the script and it's in there.
It's on the page.
Yeah, and even the feeling. It's written. Shorter sentences, the sense of the glamour, and so you try to, so I would work backwards from scripts I love in short, and that would be the way to do it for me rather than prescriptive stuff. Honestly, if I had read that David Mamet advice when I was starting out, it probably would have been too daunting. It made sense to me later when I was trying to figure out how to make more tension in scenes, and he is so great at that. But at the beginning, it was just great to think about these movies I loved and how the scripts got you there.
David Mamet, he's one of the rare guys, I think, went the other way. I think he did all this, and then he wanted to write a novel, and so did the Mad Men guy.
Matt Weiner.
Matt Weiner. He wrote a novel after he did, make us another Mad Men, for God's sake.
I know, it happens a lot. Noah Hawley did that. He still works in TV, but he wrote a novel. I think I think, I think there is a longing to have something. I think often the screenwriters I talk to want something that won't be touched by 1,000 notes.
Yes.
They only have your editor's notes. And I think it is their fantasy that they won't have, because you get so many notes.
There's so many, yes, and so many people, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that as a novelist, it's like, this is my baby and mine alone.
That's right.
It's
You
like
can't
my
touch
precious,
it.
with Frodo or whatever, Gollum, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
So sticking with the novel then on process just for a moment, in terms of outlining, editing, where you like to write, is there a spot?
Yeah.
I know these are sort of nerdy, annoying questions maybe for you, but I think a lot of people like to imagine Megan Abbott doing her thing. How does it work?
It is, it's changed over the years. I used to go to a writing space in Manhattan to write, but now I only write at home, really. I can really only write properly at home. I can take notes elsewhere or write scenes, but I need to be at my computer, which is like a PC. I need like a big.
Oh, you're on like a real desktop, not a laptop.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
I know they made those anymore.
I know, everyone says that, but you don't want to touch what's working. The writers are so superstitious, right? And if it's working, you don't want to touch it. And I tend to have an idea. It's often a true crime that I read about, and there's some aspect of it that interests me. It's not usually the crime itself, but some fascinating corner of it.
Are you a fan of Dateline?
Yeah, all those. Yeah, all of them. Yeah, Dateline was the starter one for me, or maybe even Unsolved Mysteries before that. But I grew up on Dateline.
Yeah. Keith Morrison. There's no better voice in media. Kamo. I still in some ways feel like he's narrating my life. Anytime I walk too late at home. I only recently found out he was. Well, now I'm going to mess it up a little bit, but he's either father-in-law or there's some relation to Chandler from Friends, the actor,
Oh my God.
like the real actor.
Oh yeah, I feel like maybe he married
whose name I'm forgetting.
He's like the second husband of his mom. Or
yes,
something.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Matthew Perry.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. All that stuff, and it's usually like something about what someone does or how they respond to something, or often because I write so much about women, it's a way that women who are under suspicion for something, the sort of how they're expected to act, and how there's some corner I'm interested in. Eldorado Drive was sort of inspired by a case I'd read about a woman who was involved who was murdered, and it turned out she was involved. She had a lot of domestic tumult and was also involved in this women's entrepreneur club. And that was really interesting to me.
Called The Wheel in your novel.
Yes, in my book, yeah. And that was so interesting to me because it sort of... her murder risked exposing these women's sort of private club, and the way that the women kind of panicked was so interesting to me. So that's usually some corner of it, and then I sort of take it into fictional realm from there.
Well, that's a good way into Eldorado Drive, which I'll hold up here again for the viewing audience. I totally devoured this in I think 2 sittings. I was talking to my wife about it. It's really good.
Thank you.
And there is an actual Eldorado Drive. I'm thinking this must be in California somewhere. It can't be in Michigan, but there is an Eldorado Drive. And
no.
The Cadillac, I guess, is an Eldorado
That's
Cadillac.
What I took it from. There isn't technically in Grosse Pointe an Eldorado.
No, I looked it up.
Did you find one?
Yeah, there's an Eldorado Drive in Michigan. I went online to see if it was real.
I need to look it up.
Unless I messed something up, I think I found one.
It would make sense because the that car, is huge. So I sort of took it because it was such an iconic. And that's amazing that there's a street called it.
Should we? I won't do it right now, but after the show, we'll look to see if there's a real. Yeah. And maybe I fouled something up on my internet search.
I don't know. It seems possible because there are a lot of street names in the Detroit area are named after cars, of course, as you can imagine.
That is an iconic.
It is, and all those auto barons back in the day, in the 20s and 30s, they all lived in Grosse Pointe. All their big houses were there. So a lot of things are named after the Fords, after the Dodges, all this stuff. So, but I liked it because means gold. It's about the hunt for gold.
Right.
So it had all these kind of resonances. And it was sort of when you name your street.
Did you name the book?
I did.
You
yeah.
did. Okay. Have you named all of your books, or has there ever been
often a battle? I will say.
Right.
I mean, battle is maybe too strong a word, but sometimes it takes I don't know if that's happened to you.
Oh, I've named of my 4. I've named 2.
Okay, so that seems about
yeah.
How it works.
And it's always like a late. Sometimes there's email threads going back and forth with everybody's top 10 from and sales and marketing can weigh in. Like, I think we could sell this one better, but
Yeah, and it is like I always tell, because young writers I've known will submit, because I did this, like 20 other titles, that you're losing when you do that. You have to, only give them one at a time, because if they have all these to pick from, then none of them are going to quite seem right. So it is because it is partially a marketing thing, much like the cover. So I do listen, and I'm the first to admit a lot of my initial titles haven't been ideal. So,
well, this one seems like a slam dunk. Like, that was the obvious title.
Yeah, it really felt right from the start, and I was glad when it worked out.
Did you have it from the start?
No, but I had it pretty far when I knew it. When I named the street, I was like, this should be the title. It's that moment you kind of hope for. I feel like the title comes early or late, never in between, But
that's a good point. I think that's
it.
That 4 for 4 with me on that. Yeah, it was either right away or we're like, oh my, it actually got changed like right at, after advance copies one time for me. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, that was weird, but
Yeah, it's always somewhat strange when someone telling you what they think your title should be. I mean, independent from your editor. It's like, really? Is that what you think my book is? But yeah, that seemed like the right one.
All right, so I have told the story in a different episode, but I will tell it again here just because you kind of hit something on the head. So my editor and I are the ones who go back and forth, and my wife a little bit, but we had said this is the one where it got changed after the advance copy. So we had printed advance copies going out, and my editor had a meeting with the sales and marketing team, and these are the people who are meant to sort of reach out to the independent bookstores and Barnes & Noble and all the things and position the book for sale and whatnot. And they loved my editor calls me, and I'm in California for a book event, and my editor calls me, everyone loved the book. It's a lot of excitement, but we got to talk about the title. And I'm like, what? Like, aren't we like pretty well past that? And he goes, well, so it was not my editor, but it was the CEO, Jonathan Karp, was like, I think it should be this. And he turned out to be totally right in the end. He had a much better take on the title. And so it all really worked out great. And he's a former editor too. He just has great instincts for things and how they're going to work and like what the essence of the book is. And he actually came up with something with a whole piece of logic behind it of why it was better. So it worked out in the end.
Yeah.
But that was the one that changed late.
Wow, yeah. I mean, that is very rare. And I do feel like the cover often, I have heard stories, this hasn't happened to me, but where like the president, like some high up at Barnes & Noble will not like the cover and change the cover.
Feedback coming from outside the publishing house altogether.
Yeah, because they know what will work. Yeah. And like, what are you going to say? Barnes & Noble knows what cover.
Yeah, I guess any input is worth listening to.
Yeah, I think so. But it is sort of, that's sort of in between space between, yes, it's your book, but now you've decided to sell it. So now you have to think about these market forces or cover trends, and what everyone's tired of this kind of cover, that kind of thing. It's when you've entered capitalism.
Well, back to Eldorado Drive, you have the 3 Bishop sisters here, and I won't give away anything because there really are great turns and twists here. By the way, it's not what I'm starting to get frustrated by with some books is like over twisty, like every page is another massive twist.
Yeah.
It's like the perfect amount of twists, and they're big, great ones. But you have these 3 Bishop sisters, and I love how you capture the both loving and fraught relationships that they have. It felt very real and human.
Yeah, it's so complicated, right, with sibling relationships. And I don't have sisters, but sisters particularly fascinate me because it's sort of that mix of like deep, abiding love and deep, abiding aggression and grievances from the past. As everybody, I was just reading about this new book by Susan Dominus of the New York Times about extraordinary families, and she was talking about the birth order and all this research about how the birth order turns out to be very important, and what the different pressures on the oldest versus the youngest, and then the middle one. And I think all that stuff. Once you have your role in a family, that role is set within your family for life. There's no escaping it, right? You can't reset it. And so I think it was so interesting with these three women because they've lived very different lives. They're in very different moments. The thing that's binding them is that they all need money, but all their past issues come to the fore, of course, because they've been through it together and had a kind of tumultuous childhood together. So they've been through, with your siblings, you've all been through the same war. Yeah,
right. Oh, well, yeah, depending on how far apart you are in age.
True.
Sometimes the wars are a little different because your parents can be in very different places.
Right. And sometimes your sibling,
economically or whatever,
absolutely,
even geographically.
You have a different childhood in some cases. And sometimes your older sibling can be more like a parent in those cases if the gap is large enough.
Yeah, that's my case, actually. I have much older siblings and
okay.
Yeah, they would babysit me, my parents were not like that.
Yeah.
But that's so interesting, the birth order thing. I have thought about that. I have 3 kids, and I can see it. And I've seen some of the research. I need to get that book you mentioned so I can learn about it a little more. But it made me, my reaction hearing like how it's set made me a little sad. I want to figure out if there's a way to offer them a reset.
Yeah.
Go to my oldest, like, if you want to be the baby this week, go for it. And like to the baby, like, you lead us, take us out wherever, give them a chance. Like, you don't have to always be that. I wonder if a parent can intervene, or maybe intervention as a parent generally is a bad thing, I guess. Or maybe I don't know how to.
No, she talks about that, about different ways, especially in these families where, in this case, like very high achievers, where sometimes it was the parents actually stepping, sort of the things that they could do, that they did that worked, sort of stepping out of the sibling conflict, or not coddling the baby, or different things that seem to have like a big effect. So I would imagine that there's a version of that for the birth order, so that the oldest doesn't feel too much pressure and the middle doesn't feel completely ignored, like all these sort of cliches.
And the youngest doesn't feel no pressure. Like, I can get to do whatever I want.
Yes, that's right.
Road has been totally blazed for me.
That's right.
Well, the book is terrific. The wheel is the I don't want to
it's just like
spoil
a money making operation.
A suburban household money operating.
That's right.
Okay,
that's right.
But it's terrific, and does capture some things that have happened. So there's a little bit of real life stuff in there in terms of the crime element. So
yes, and it's that's. In some ways, that the suburban women and money-making operation goes back to the days of Tupperware. So it's a long-standing tradition.
Right.
Just takes different forms. Mary Kay Cosmetics.
It
takes different forms.
Cool. So I read something in the news, the Turnout. Is that something that's one of the things in operation? It sounds like you have a few book-to-film or you straight-to-film things going.
I mean, I don't know if any of them will, this is like the classic, who knows what will happen. Right now, Eldorado Drive, A24 acquired it, so I'm writing it for them as a limited series. But you never really know. The Turnout's been in development for a long time. And then I have a few, separate projects. And so it's.
Are you working on another novel, or you're focused on these other projects?
I have started a new novel. I always feel like, I don't know if you feel this way, it's good to be pretty as far into as you can get on the new novel when there's one coming out, because otherwise you kind of it's such
feel a little empty.
You do, you have to have that, and there's a little bit of panic, when you're like promoting and touring and doing this stuff. That if you don't have that thing, that's I already got 20,000 words on the new thing, so I do have something going that I'm I'm interested in. I hope it takes off. I don't know if you've had this, but often I've written 100 pages of books and abandoned them, so I never really know.
A few times. It's disheartening to go, and sometimes much more, which is truly disheartening to sort of get near the end and think, oh, this is just not working. That never feels good. But I'm excited for you to get out on tour on this. So you're not yet on tour. This is sort of like a tune-up interview to talk about El Dorado Drive before you get out there and go full throttle. But
yes, doing a lot of Midwestern dates and stuff. So this one is...
That's great.
Yeah, keeping it local.
Well, on to the lightning round then with Megan Abbott. Here we go. I'm going to finish off my gimlet, which I really...
This is delicious.
Really loved. Your favorite book as a kid?
If I'm honest, Flowers in the Attic.
Flowers in the Attic. What is that one?
It's a very deranged. It's a very deranged book about children who are their grandmother locks them in the attic for years to hide them. And it's famous for being very inappropriate for children to read. It's just like
which is why you're now writing crime fiction.
It's a really deranged and crazy book.
What's the reading age, roughly?
I mean, I don't think it was actually meant for children, but children read in my era, and I think still these books. There's so many of them now, but the first four were all written by V.C. Andrews, and everyone. I wouldn't give it to my 10-year-old daughter, but I read it as a 10-year-old. There's a lot of inappropriate activity and a lot of violence in them, but I loved them. So it was clearly my entryway.
I'm about to reveal a possible parenting fail that I did the other day. There's that Sigourney Weaver movie called Copycat from years ago.
Right.
And my 11-year-old he's gotten into writing. And I don't know. We also are fans of Dateline and some other things, but he was like, he was going to write about a killer, like a serial killer. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I let him watch Copycat. He's almost 12, he's like in a couple months. So he might have been a little early, but at the end, I'm like, how'd you handle that, buddy? And he's like, I can handle way more.
Okay, see?
He didn't want to shut down the lane of watching inappropriate film.
He knew if he said that, he doesn't get to watch any of the rest of
he may have gone on to have like terrible nightmares that may have been all bluster. He might have been more than he can handle. I'm not sure.
It still can be good. My parents showed me everything when I was young, and I feel like sometimes it's good to have to work through that fear or something.
He may be working through it. We'll see. We'll see what a fail it was or not soon enough, I guess. Book or books you're reading now?
I'm reading now this new biography of R. Crumb, Dan Nadell's biography. He's like a counterculture cartoonist. He's most famous for that Keep on Truckin' cartoon, but also like really deranged comics from the 60s and 70s. And it's a new biography of him. It's really interesting about his process because he came from a very traumatic childhood and somehow turned it all into art in that way. I'm always sort of fascinated by people that either would become a serial killer or a great artist, and somehow he was able to turn it into art.
How did you come across this book?
I had read about it in the Times, and R. Crumb had always been kind of interesting to me. His illustrations when you see them because they're very extreme and often graphic, but they play with a lot with Americana, and there was a really interesting profile of the biographer and Crumb sort of hesitantly agreeing to participate in it, and also agreeing to not sanitize. Didn't want it sanitized in any way. And those are the ones I like. And I don't really authorized biographies. I always I don't know.
I want to deviate from the lightning round for 1 second because I'm curious how you come across most of the books that you read. Is it browsing in the store or the Times or a friend?
It's often a friend. That's who I always trust the most. And I'm in a couple 2-person book clubs where it's just so you don't have to really read anything you don't like if you're just with one other person. And so together we'll hear something or read a review in the Times or elsewhere. And then I hand sell in bookstore. Independent bookstores to me are the best. So they know my taste and they'll say, oh, you got to read this.
That's great. The way the movie stores used to be. It's like Vincent's picks. And you're like, oh, Vincent's movies are always, he's always got it.
That's right. He's going to say Copycat. That's
right.
the one.
Have you seen that movie, by the way?
Copycat, yes.
Yeah, with Sigourney.
I did. I mean, that was that era. It was post Silence of the Lambs. There were a lot of serial killer movies then.
That was good. Least attended book event ever.
I mean, I've had a few, but the one I always remember is which is an amazing store, Book Passage. I don't know if you've ever been to it in Northern California.
No.
But it was, I think there were more employees in attendance than actual customers. And I remember they kept saying, I don't understand why more people didn't come. Obama was here a few weeks ago and he had a line out the door. I thought, well, at least I feel better. Like that's,
Yeah, that's your benchmark.
Yeah,
that's all right.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, better to be the measuring stick than the whatever.
That's right. They felt very sorry for me. You never know.
Well, that's, as you know, having listened to the show, everyone has a 0, 1. The biggest stars like you have all had those days. And even now, like, you can still be a huge star and just have kind of a whiff. It's just like it's hard to get people into the bookstore sometimes.
It is. And it's sort of the independent ones are often the best because they kind of know what time of day is, but
and they have a regular, customer base of people who come and they can, I don't know, have the email blast out and
I always tell myself though that like sometimes if it's like 5 people, they will remember it forever because you actually end up having a conversation with them because you can't really do your like spiel when it's 5 people and then then they're fans for life unless you insult them or something.
All right, the book that most influenced your writing career.
I mean, it probably would be Raymond Chandler's first book, The Big Sleep, which is the famous Bogart movie, is just because I had never read anything like that. And it was so atmospheric and stylish and mysterious. And
how old were you when you read it, do you think?
I read it in my early 20s, and I'd never read anything in the hard-boiled. I'd read a lot of Elroy before, so I'd read contemporary stuff like that, but I'd never read anything like that. And it was so beautiful. The prose is so famously beautiful in his books, and the world was so evocative, and it really kind of hooked me in.
All right. The best thing about Detroit.
Oh, well, Detroit Tigers, number 1. Certainly Verner's Ginger Ale.
I was thinking of Magnum P.I. when anyone says Detroit Tigers.
That's true. We have a lot of, Buddy's Pizza. But also in general, I think it's resilience. It's a city that just keeps reinventing itself and somehow still survives. And I kind of have loved to see it come out of, having grown up in some of its roughest times, to see it now have this like thriving arts community and several businesses there. It's been great to see. Even
the Detroit Lions are doing pretty well these days.
I know.
So nice.
My brother was over the moon.
All right, staying on the Detroit theme, Eminem or Kid Rock?
I mean, if those are the choices, Eminem. But I would probably, and I like Eminem, but I would probably go White Stripes if I could.
White Stripes, okay, good, yeah. I did. So I knew they were both from Detroit, the two I mentioned.
Yes.
But I Googled rock music just to be more thorough, and White Stripes was the next one that popped up. Yeah,
they were. It was pretty great. I know Jack White doesn't live there any longer, but they were both real Detroit kids, so that's always a good thing. And of course, you have all the great Motown ones, but in more recent vein, I mean, Kid Rock is not
not your
my
cup of
scene.
tea.
No.
Yeah. Favorite few recent TV shows to recommend to the audience?
Oh, I mean, I'm really fixated now on The Rehearsal on HBO.
I saw the ad for that.
Show.
It's like a murder. Oh, The Rehearsal. No, I'm thinking of something else.
There's so many shows.
The Residence,
now.
I was thinking of. The Rehearsal.
This is the one, Nathan Fielder, this is the second season, but he sort of came up as what you call like a cringe comic, but his shows aren't that. They're really explorations of identity. He's impossible to describe, but the whole idea is that this season is all about the airline industry and why these crashes occur, and so he like does this deep dive into the airline industry, and he comes up with this notion that it's the pilot-co-pilot relationship that causes a lot of co-pilot feels like he can't say to the pilot, I think we're in trouble. So he tries to intervene by having pilots essentially rehearse the scenes to be able to handle that negotiation better. It's great. That's been great. And on another vein, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives on Hulu has been a favorite of mine. So, yeah.
I haven't seen either. I have heard of the Secret Lives one, though.
Yeah,
I've heard good things. I want to check it out.
It's I love it. I will take any Mormon content on that. But it's great. There's a lot of TV now. It really is hard to find what works. books.
But it's worth sorting through it because some of it is so bad.
It is.
But some is amazing still. I feel like we've kind of come out of the golden age, but there's still some great stuff, but there's a lot of bad stuff.
There is.
All right, last question for Megan Abbott. One piece of advice for the audience.
Boy, I would say, I mean, this is something I think about all the time, but that in terms of reading or any pleasure activity, I don't believe in the guilty pleasures term. And I think all reading and movies and everything, it's all good. Because I think books, movies, TV, music, they're all, I mean, it's a cliche now, but they're all empathy machines. And I think we should go into those other stories. We're all kind of in our bubbles now. And sometimes we tend to want to, watch only what we feel comfortable with or read. But I think it's such a great way to expand our world, and we should not place judgment on ourselves for that. Yeah. So
that's a great message. Megan, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. It was so fun.
So great. I loved it. Thank you.